Hola y bienvenido. Hello and welcome to Thursdays for the Soul. Thursdays for the Soul is a webinar series for the whole church. We faithfully focus on care and education for the people of God and create opportunities to digitally worship together as the whole of the United Church of Christ. From prayer, music, and psalms to interviews of key leaders and how-tos in congregational life. This series stays current to the relevant topics of the time and offers opportunities of connection in the wider church and in our communities. Together, we can bring our church and the world towards the world God imagines for all of us. Buen dia. I am the Reverend Roberto Ochoa, Minister for Ethnic Inclusion and Congregational Support for Rural and Small Churches of the Faith Education, Innovation, and Formation, known as Faith Info, ministry team with the Justice and Local Church Ministries of the United Church of Christ, and your host today. Gracias for joining us. We are pleased to present Immigrant Welcoming Congregations Working for Human Rights and Dignity for All, a conversation with members of the UCC National Collaborative on Immigration. Before we get to today's session, let me tell you about what we have coming up next week. On October 27th, Thursdays for the Soul presents How to Protect Your Digital Information, a practical discussion of digital privacy. Considering the Dobbs decision that abortion is not protected under the Constitution, having a firm grasp of digital privacy is all the more important. Knowing who has access to your online life, from period trackers to grocery apps and social media, and what companies can do with that information is critical. This session will help empower and inform congregations and individuals to take practical steps to protect their digital privacy and provide context about what is happening in the digital privacy space. All our Thursdays for the Soul digital programs begin at 9:30 a.m. Hawaiian, 11:30 a.m. Alaskan, 12:30 Pacific, 1:30 Mountain, 2:30 Central, and 3:30 p.m. Eastern times. Dear friends, if these hours inspire you in any way and you would like to continue supporting ministries like this, consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. That's UCC to 41444. Thank you. Now for today's program, Immigrant Welcoming Congregations Working for Human Rights and Dignity for All. Thursdays for the Soul is honored to have a panel of faith leaders and impact leaders who are doing on-the-ground community organizing with UCC congregations on border issues, immigrants' rights, sanctuary, refugees resettlement, and the accompaniment of asylum seekers as part of the greater struggle for human rights and dignity for all people. Today, we will hear stories of how anti-immigrant policies are hurting our community members and offer examples on how to create concrete methodologies to educate and move our congregation to effectively engage on the issue of immigration. This digital program is part of a special series of Thursdays for the Soul focused on 12 Just World Covenant programs in the United Church of Christ. Every third Thursday of each month, we will present a program of the World Covenant programs. And to learn more about this special series, we invite you to do so by going to www.ucc.org, Just World Covenants. It is my pleasure to introduce Reverend Linda Jaramillo, a member of the Collaborative and the former Executive Minister for Justice and Witness Ministry in the United Church of Christ, who's going to start off with this conversation. Bienvenida, Reverend Linda. So glad to see you again.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's afternoon for most of us. Good morning to the folks and our siblings in Hawaii. My name is the Reverend Linda Jaramillo. Thank you, Robert, very much for the introduction. I want to begin by just sharing with you that our moderator today was intended to be the Reverend Noel Anderson, who is the coordinator for immigrant work in the United Church of Christ with Church World Service. But we're happy to report to you that Noel and Nina, his wife, just had a baby girl last night. And so they're busy being family And so Noel texted us all this morning, so we congratulate Noel and Nina and baby girl's big brother, Ayan. We're welcoming to their family. So yay, Noel. And so we won't see Noel today, but we'll hold him in prayer and celebration and give him our love. So thank you. It's been an opportunity for us to be together and planning for this time together. So let me just tell you a little bit of background about the Immigration Collaborative and the issue that we're going to be dealing with today. The United Church of Christ has decades-long history of commitment to immigration justice and our immigrant friends and siblings. Numerous resolutions have been passed by the General Synod over the years, many with a very general focus. However, due to our nation's lack of acknowledgement and understanding of our history and disregard for human and civil rights, for our neighbors, some of these resolutions have been much more explicit and specific of the context of the crisis of our time. In 2015, a group of leaders came together, and leaders who are in this circle came together, hosted by the Church of the Good Shepherd, to develop a framework for our work. So our theme, God Loves Beyond Borders, was born, and the call to action was launched. The UCC National Collaborative on Immigration works at grassroots level to engage immigrant welcoming and sanctuary congregations that walk alongside immigrants of all backgrounds to lift up prophetic witness and build welcoming communities for all. This collaboration was founded with the support of Justice and Witness Ministries that has helped form the network of grassroots UCC pastors and lay leaders through the years throughout the country who are engaged in this critical issue. We met at the border in 2015, as I indicated, to strategize how we would spread the immigrant rights work across the life of the church. And we framed the immigrant welcoming congregational model that is it was taken up by a number of conferences that resulted in the General Synod resolution in 2017 to become an immigrant welcoming denomination, and mobilizing the UCC and its congregations to become those congregations of immigrant welcoming people. I've heard the concern often that UCC General Synod resolutions sit on a shelf. Well, I want to dispel that myth. I want to tell you right now, the UCC conferences, congregations, ecumenical partners, interfaith partners, and lots of other folk across the landscapes of our work have responded, and we are still responding 5 years later to the immigrant welcoming movement. Since then, we have built a network of about 500 congregations actively engaged in accompaniment, advocacy, and movement making. Some of our ongoing goals include mapping and registering more UCC immigrant welcoming sanctuary congregations, hosting training for local folks, local conferences on becoming immigrant welcoming, lifting up prophetic witness through the media, US News, UC News, and advocacy in other places about local immigrant issues. The intersectional justice work with the UCC on overlapping issues such as racial justice, LGBTQIA and rights, and climate migration. And we are now collaborating strongly with Global Hope on migration and refugee ministries and other UCC critical entities, including the Colectivo, the UCC Latinx Ministries, Pacific Islander Asian American Ministries, Encuentros Latinx, and many, many others. Noel Anderson, as I indicated, is our grassroots organizer for the UCC, and Irene Willis for Global Hope Ministries also joins with the collaborative on a regular basis. We'll be sharing more about resources a little bit later, but I just want to call your attention to a letter of urgent action that has been put in the chat to President Biden around the Measure 42. So you'll get more about that a little bit later. But before I open us with prayer, I want to introduce my colleagues who are on this panel with me, and so glad to see you all again. The Reverend Randy Mayer, who is a pastor of Church of the Good Shepherd in Sahuarita, Arizona, is a recognized national and global leader, a prophetic advocate, coalition builder, and on-the-ground friend to thousands of our immigrant siblings and friends, where accompaniment is needed much every day. I also want to invite and introduce you to the Reverend Deborah Lee. We were classmates at Pacific School of Religion, got to do that claim. Is the executive director of the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity. She has worked in the interfaith circles of faith and social justice for over 25 years, and engaged dozens of congregations in Northern California and beyond to become sanctuary congregations. Reverend Deborah has also invited a colleague of hers, Sergio, who will join us and share his experience as a person deeply impacted by U.S. policy in our time. So before I turn it to Randy, I want to open us with a word of prayer. Would you pray with me? Ay, Dios Santo, te damos gracias por la oportunidad de estar aquí contigo, que estés aquí con nosotros. Dear God in heaven, Mother and Father of us all, we know you are here among us, and we invite your Spirit to give us strength and give us courage for the facing of these days, and most of all, for our siblings who are day by day are experiencing the tragedy that we will describe. In our hope, in our love, in our courageous movement, we ask for your strength in the holy name of Jesus. Amen. Let me turn it over to Reverend Randy, and then he will pass it on to Reverend Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you. It is good to bring greetings from the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. The Good Shepherd United Church of Christ is located about 35 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border. And we, along with the Southwest Conference, have a long history of working along the border with migrants and folks that are pilgrims that are traveling through this land. I get a lot of questions about immigration. What has caused our current issues with immigration at the border? Why are there so many people? And the reality is that these problems or these issues are much deeper than the last 2 or 3 years. They actually go back 20 or 30 years. And if you really, really want to be honest, it goes back to the conquistadors and the colonizers 400 or 500 years ago. The doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, the Monroe Doctrine. The story continues to repeat itself even today, where multinational corporations and agribusiness have raped and pillaged the land and people in Latin America. They have structured the economy so that the profit goes to a few and the hardworking masses are left in poverty and squalor. So what do we really expect when struggling people arrive at the border following what has been stolen from them? The current situation is very dangerous and really difficult. And much of it has been building. The pandemic wreaked havoc everywhere. I know it did in my community. It hit all parts of our world. All churches have struggled with the pandemic. It hit the border especially hard. People were scared to death. And people were very conscious of the situation, and they stayed home for many months. Immigration actually slowed down at the border for a year or so. The previous administration, however, used the pandemic to put into place some racist and dangerous policies. The migrant protection protocols, you may recall, that forced asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for their asylum hearing. And then they used an obscure health law called Title 42 that completely stopped immigration at the border, saying that due to the COVID pandemic, it was a public health risk to allow immigrants to arrive in the United States. Today, Title 42 is still in place, and it, in fact, has been expanded now in the last week to include Venezuelans. The migrant protection protocols were finally lifted over the summer. When you stop the flow of traffic, however, when migrants are stuck, when desperate people fleeing violence and poverty have nowhere to go, the border actually becomes a pressure cooker. And the cities all along the border have become more dangerous for migrants. Gangs and cartel activity preying on desperate people are all over the place. in Nogales, Mexico, the Southwest Conference is very involved in accompanying asylum seekers at the largest shelter. It's called Casa Misericordia para todas las naciones. It holds about 120 to 130 people in normal times. During the pandemic, we had 260 to 300 people there. But currently there's about 120, mostly families. And we have a team of folks that help get their papers in order and schedule them for their credible fear interviews. Stories that just are heartbreaking, the terror these people have gone through, needing a safe place, and the casa is that safe place. Even though Title 42 is in place, we have been able to successfully cross into the United States more than 1,000 people this year under a humanitarian exemption visa. It has been incredible to see these families crossing into a new phase in their lives. They need to be welcomed with open arms into our churches, into the United States. We also work closely with the Casalita Welcome Center in Tucson. This shelter in Tucson, the Welcome Center, is currently receiving between 400 and 500 asylum seekers each day, bused from different places along the border. These people are coming from Cuba, Ecuador, Peru. We have been having a lot of folks come from India and from Africa, from Haiti, all coming into the country. The Biden administration just this week changed the process for Venezuelans. If they come through the ports of entry, they will be processed as asylum seekers. But if they come desperate through the deserts, they will be deported back into southern Mexico. That is heartbreaking when these families have crossed the Darien Gap, traveled so many miles, and then being deported. Because the border towns are dangerous for migrants and the wait can be months to get an asylum, a credible fear interview, they often now, because of the dangerousness of the cities, they are deciding in big numbers to cross through the desert. The Good Shepherd also has a humanitarian ministry in the desert. We are a life-saving presence in the desert, giving food, water, and medical attention to desperate people, everyone we find. This year, we have put out double the amount of water than what we had put out in the desert on the migrant trails in the last year. The last 6 to 8 months, we have been finding and tending to hundreds and hundreds of people. We're finding more people than we have in the last 10 years. Groups of unaccompanied minors, families, mothers and children, desperate people fleeing horrible situations. We're able to give them support, tend to their immediate needs, and then we call the Border Patrol, who take them into their care. Children are reunited with family members in the United States, and then some are processed as asylum seekers, some of the adults and their families, and others, for reasons we can't understand, are deported. The border is a challenging place. So much hope. There is so much heartbreak. There is so much terror. We are constantly in need, seeking churches and safe places, sponsors to send asylum families. So we urge your churches out there to look into the immigrant welcoming process, become acquainted with the immigrant community in your midst, but also contact Irene Hassan at the Hope office at the national offices, contact Irene Hassan, and she'll help get you connected to an asylum family that is desperately in need of support from your congregation. Thank you for your time, and we are always here. The Good Shepherd has received lots of visitors from across the country, churches, individuals, pastors that come down to learn more about the immigration situation right here at the border. Thank you.
Thank you
I'll
so
pass
much,
it on
Randy.
to Deborah Lee.
Thank you, Randy.
Yep.
I want to speak to you today about the important role that people in faith communities in the interior can play. Randy shared about the work being done at the border, and those of you who live along the border, which is a very big border, stretches across several states, those are some key activities that you can be playing. But there's also an important role for people who live in states and cities that are more in the interior. Each region can respond, no matter where you are. We know that Martha's Vineyard can respond, which is quite far away from the border, at least the southern border. You all have unique things and characters of the region which you can utilize to best support newly arrived migrants. Some of you may be living in places where there actually are jobs and that need to be filled. Some of you are in places that housing may be more available and more affordable. Some of you may be in places where there are just some good volunteers. So this response to migrants can take place no matter where you are. The organization I represent is the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity. We are based in California. We are a multi-faith organization, so we work with UCC congregations, but other Jewish, Buddhist, and other Christian denominations as well. We work for the dignity and full participation of immigrants and those who are impacted by incarceration in our society. One of the things that is unique about California and the Bay Area that we are trying to really maximize in support of people arriving, is the fact that we have a history, especially in the Bay Area and Los Angeles, a history of being sanctuary cities. In the Bay Area, in San Francisco, that goes back into the 1980s, where communities and cities already have been putting into place policies that said that we would welcome, provide services to all residents regardless of status, and be a good place for people to land. San Francisco, like other cities, have been places where waves of immigrants have been coming for decades. And it's a place where there's more immigrant participation and more welcome and acceptance of immigrants as well. So one of the things that I recently heard from Irene, that was mentioned in terms of the UCC Project Hope, was the way that UCC congregations in the different cities have been responding to the situation of migrant buses, the ways they've been pulled in to support the arrival of these buses. And that helped to prompt me to think about and to get our cities involved, to thinking in preparation to have a plan. Do we have a plan should buses of migrants be arriving? Does the city have a plan to be able to provide respite care? I just would like to ask if someone could please send a link to Sergio. The link is not working for him. Sergio will be joining us in a few minutes to be able to share his own experience and story. So every city, no matter where you live, could be the place where either buses of migrants could be arriving, or even without the buses, migrants are arriving every day on their own. And there are ways to be able to help and to support. As Randy mentioned, asylum is one of the few very narrow exceptions for people to enter into the U.S. The U.S. immigration system is highly restrictive, basically to only people who are wealthy, highly skilled, or a few people, limited number of people who have immediate U.S. citizen family members. So almost for everyone else, there is no legal way to immigrate. But asylum provides a short and narrow window for people who are seeking safety and protection and can qualify as refugees. As Randy mentioned, many people have had to flee from some really deep root causes, and it is a faith imperative for us to be asking why and to be addressing those root causes. Many of these root causes the people themselves have had no control over and have had nothing to do with. So our response as people of faith is, in fact, an act of repair. It is an act of justice. It's an act of compassion. And it's also an act of repair for the legacies of colonialism and racism and the current issues around U.S. gun sales that go across borders, our climate issues that we are more proportionately responsible for in this country, and other issues that are forcing people to flee. When we think about the many people who are coming right now from Venezuela and Cuba, we have to ask ourselves, what has been the impact of decades and years of economic sanctions against these countries? What do we expect to happen? Why should we not have expected that people would have to flee desperate poverty? And now we are having to take responsibility for that. We should be taking responsibility. So if I can say a little bit about accompaniment and how the role that interior cities can play. Once people come into the border, many of them are arriving to families and trying to reconnect to families who are going to help them. This is how waves of immigrants have come to this country in the past. My own parents came both as single adults, and they each had an uncle or an aunt who received them, who picked them up from the airport. They gave them a place to stay for the first several months, got them enrolled in a school, put them on a bus, helped them to find their first job, their first apartment, taught them how to drive, and helped them to buy their first car, taught them just how to navigate the basics of survival in this country. That's what families have done. Waves of generations of families have done. And this is the case of most people arriving at the border. About 80% of those coming right now have a family member or have a sponsor or someone that they are trying to connect to. But there's 20% who don't. And that is the gap that accompaniment teams and faith communities can help to fill. But when I finish, hopefully we'll have Sergio who'll be able to share his own experience of being one of those people who did not have somebody, and how accompaniment was able to help him. So what we do is that we help to train and consult with congregations who want to do accompaniment and train teams of volunteers of 5 people of congregations to help to match them with a newly arrived family and to support them to meet their goals. For most people arriving, their top 3 goals are work, housing, and legal support, and being able to obtain these things. So the teams help them to navigate the system, to find them some type of housing accommodation that can work. Sometimes that has been in the church that's created a small apartment, or a private owner who's willing to rent something out for free or to very below market cost, or to some kind of creative solution around housing for the first several months while they can get their feet on the ground. Helps them to connect to work that doesn't require a work permit, because most arriving can apply for a work permit, but that could take up to 1 year to 2 years to actually get to be able to legally work. So connecting them with odd jobs, and then to legal orientation and representation. Basically, to be someone's extended family and community, to provide encouragement and support and connect them to resources. Our program, we encourage accompaniment teams to go for 6 months because the goal is really self-sufficiency, and to ask the teams to then focus on other new families that can arrive. Of course, the friendships continue and the support continues, but really it is for that initial gap period in order for the family to stabilize. So there does exist a network of congregations also in a geographic area who can team up and support. One congregation doesn't have to do it all, but can work across congregations to provide everything that a family might need. So I think I've mentioned everything here, and I just want to close by saying that as a country, we have done this before during the Vietnam and Southeast Asian wars, in the 80s with those coming from El Salvador and Guatemala. And this is another period and wave of opportunities for faith communities to encounter the face of God, but also to rejuvenate and to have rejuvenate spiritually and to connect with neighbors and community groups. So thank you, and I'll pass it on to Linda, who will share about what's being done in Portland, and we'll have a testimony.
Great. Thank you so much, Deborah. I really appreciate what you've shared with us. Just so you all know, we're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on in Oregon. But to call your attention, because we're trying to get Sergio hooked in, and he's trying to get in. So we're going to move on and talk about what we're doing in the Portland, Oregon, and the all of Oregon area. But before I do that, I also want to thank Irene Hassan, who has put information in the chat about the places. She's put a map in the chat, so you can look at that map and see where accompaniment is happening. Thank you so much, Irene. That's very, very helpful to us. And a reminder that if you haven't, and before we hang up today, and we'll remind you at the end, that Title 42 is on the docket. So we really need to get those letters to Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, but we'll remind you of that later. Now, I really would love to share with you some of the work, and as we talked about the border, and we've heard about the ways in which the border has really been impacted by the situation that we've seen. And for all intents and purposes, you've heard from Randy, you've heard from Deborah, and the interior, and I'm here to say that the border is extending all the way north to Oregon and Washington, Idaho, and so forth. But in terms of the Central Pacific Conference, I live in Portland, Oregon, and I'm a member of the Ainsworth United Church of Christ in Portland, Oregon. And we were one of the sponsors of the 2017 resolution that went to the General Synod on the immigrant welcoming denomination. Our congregations in this area took it seriously, I kid you not, and launched a local movement like none I've seen in many, many years. They activated a network of congregations in Oregon and Southern Washington that convenes monthly. And I want to give a shout out to Bruce Bishop, who's in the house. I saw his name here. Bruce Bishop, thank you so much for your leadership and consistency as we've moved forward. And I also know my friend and colleague, Pat Rumer, is here from the collaborative in the Central Pacific Conference. So this coalition of churches and leaders have built a bond of trust, and we've connected to each other on a regular basis. And the spirit of collaboration has been proven that the Holy Spirit is driven with our collective strength and power to be mobilized. We've also had an historic connection to the Oregon Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, with UCC activists, ambassadors, advocates engaging in the broad movement, especially stepping in to accompany our neighbors who needed it. We've done public policy advocacy, public witness, congregational leadership and education, community mobilization, prophetic action. All of that continues in the life of the Central Pacific Conference. You may know or may not know that we have passed some significant legislation in Oregon over the last 2 and 3 years. The new Sanctuary Act passed the Oregon legislature in 2021 session was a monumental accomplishment. There is none like it across the nation. It basically really outlawed the use of public funded detention beds. So that's not a possibility. Local jurisdictions cannot do that any longer. It also added harassment for harassment as an option for immigrants and refugees to the protected class of persons who were given the opportunity to call the Oregon Department of Justice anti-bias hotline. And in that hotline that has already been opened, there are bilingual and bicultural leaders who have been hired to message and manage for our local hotline numbers. There have been many, many other parts of the new Sanctuary Act. I don't have time to go through them all now, but that's been one of those monumental actions that's been taken in Oregon to renew our 30 and 40-year commitment to sanctuary. In last year's short session, it was further supplemented by a bill on universal representation, which gives support, financial support, and gives clients the option to select their own attorney during their process for legal status, whether they be an immigrant or asylum seeker. An Oregon Office of Immigration and Refugee Services was established, and its executive was named just a few months ago. But I have to say, with all of that that's happening, all of that we know, there is still a critical need for systems sustainability. There is a critical need for that. Direct services continue to be desperately needed. The direct services that not only is provided at the border by Randy and colleagues there, but what Deb is doing in the interior, but our sanctuary and immigrant welcoming churches across the life of the United Church of Christ. This immediate response system is needed daily, frankly, and hourly. So just in the last month, I will say, and I talked with one of our pastors here outside of Portland this morning, just in the last month, persons were bused into our state from our neighbor states in the South. They've arrived in Portland, and metropolitan neighbors have received folks. Most are Venezuelan asylum seekers in desperate need of housing and other basic human supports. They received some emergency funding from the Department of Homeland Security, but it will not ever meet their need. So thanks to Alaide Ibarra, who is the executive of the immigrant welcoming immigrant movement for interfaith movement for immigrant justice, lost track of my acronym, and leaders from that movement. They have taken on the coordination of this urgent need, this urgent immediate need, and our UCC immigrant welcoming congregations have stepped in as well to support. The border reality that Deborah and Randy described is extended to the northern border of our nation today, as we know it and experience it. It is clear to us that our sanctuary status as a state is desperately needed, and it's met with its set of complexities. And our systems are not adequately able to provide that kind of support at this point in time. So our encouragement, and the encouragement we always get from Emerge, the immigrant welcoming congregations and others, is that we must expand our networks to ecumenical and interfaith partners. That's an essential piece of what we do. It's that trust building, it's that coalition building, that's that connections that are made, because once the relationships are built, it's an automatic go-to to those folk. And Emerge has done that for many, many, many years, and we're very, very lucky and happy to be a part of it. We must expand those networks. We must engage and challenge our public governmental entities to establish policies, protocols, and funding for urgent and sustaining response. The places like Oregon and Portland and others who have declared themselves, either counties declared themselves sanctuary, really need to put the money where the mouth is. We really need to have them engaged in the conversation with us to support the persons who are coming here. And this is the emergency that we have going on right now. So that's really what's going on with our challenge here at this moment in time. We are grateful, continue to be grateful for our ongoing partnership with Noel and Irene, who have provided support and grant resources in this time of crisis. For the matter of fact, the Central Pacific Conference and my own church, Ainsworth United Church of Christ, applied for an urgency grant to help support our brother who's an asylum seeker, who is a member of our congregation. And the Central Pacific Conference, the immigrant welcoming congregations, are in the midst of looking at how we can create an emergency fund that can really support people in a more sustainable way. We have churches in our area, a group of pastors that have many churches have just written the checks to help pay for people's motel rooms. And right now we have this group of Venezuelans who are here. We're not sure. They started out being 8 persons, but it looks like there's more who desperately need housing. So our churches are responding with not only financial support, but humanitarian aid. And so that's what we've been doing in terms of creating a fund and trying to do that. And we realize and know that there are limits to our congregation's resources. So I think a lot of this is really as an essential that we've all talked about, all three of us have talked about, is that there's no way, any of us can do it alone. So that's where we are in terms of our work here in the Pacific Northwest. And I say it'll take an expansion of this village. It'll be a massive village to public entities, the governmental entities, private nonprofits, people of faith and goodwill, to be the voice of justice and welcome in our times. And so I'm looking at the chat to find out how we're doing. If Casario's trying to get in, and we're not sure we're going to be able to get him into video. Do you have any thoughts, Deborah? Have you?
Yes, he's still going to try, but maybe I'll answer a question that has come up.
Sure,
And the
absolutely.
question
Go
is,
ahead.
Question is, how can an asylum family become independent in 6 months when they cannot legally work? Has the 1-year wait time of application submission until the work permit can be requested and rescinded and moved back to original 6 months? So the question is, yes. First of all, we have to be advocating about people being able to work. That's an advocacy point. There have been deliberate slowdowns, especially during the Trump administration, deliberately slowing down approving people's work permits that have really delayed. I think Sergio will maybe be able to share too. It took him 2 years to actually get his work permit. So it's not that in 6 months people are completely independent, but we have to be careful that we don't create dependency too. And it also means that people are working and they are surviving and they are hustling. And partly, I think we as an organization put a 6-month goal for our transition time with families because there's new families coming. So we can't provide the Cadillac version every time, and we have to be to be moving in that direction. So Sergio's here, and so maybe Sergio, you would like to share your story, and then we can answer any more questions that come up after that.
Yeah, sorry about the delayed technology. Always is something. Okay. Thank you all for being here. My name is Sergio. I'm from Nicaragua, and I suffer political persecution back in Nicaragua. And for that reason, I have to leave my family, my house, my country, and that was for safety. I did not have any other options just to leave the country. And when I traveled through Mexico, I tried to cross Mexico border, U.S. border, and they put me in the detention center, and they put me in an MPP program, and they sent me back to Mexico and wait for my hearing. After 3 hearings, they let me in, but they sent me to a detention center, and I was in a detention center for 6 months when the COVID-19 started, and things were like a little worse than now, like very bad situation with COVID. So at the end, well, I was released with a bond, and when I was released, I found that I don't have like many different things. Like I was trying to get housing, food, or some resource different because I'm not allowed to work at that moment. So I couldn't work and buy my own things. So I have many difficulties like find a place to stay or find a job or find some resource that I needed at that moment. So I finally found the Interfaith Movement and Nueva Esperanza team group, that is a team for accompaniment team, that they helped me a lot with, including try to get food, housing, and with legal assistance. That was the most important, especially when you arrive in a new country, you don't know anything about the country, and you, especially, well, I mean, there's many people that they even know the language, so it's very hard. I understand a little English, so I couldn't get more information, but even for me, it was very hard trying to get all the assistance that I need, especially the legal assistance here is very expensive, and we don't know where we can find um, like affordable legal assistance or non-profit legal assistance. And with all that, the team, they helped me a lot with all that, including getting a driver license. That was very important for some small job that I did. And yeah, that's was a big difference for me. The team, they just tell me, oh, you need help with this. So they guide me through all the resources that I couldn't get. And that's what's so important for me, be in touch with this team. And I'm still friend with my team members. And that's a good relation that made me build a community here. And that's what I'm so happy to arrive in this community. Thank you.
Sergio, bienvenido. It's so good to see you. So glad to have you with us. We do have about 2 or 3 minutes for questions. If you want to type anything in, I'll watch for them. And while we're waiting for that, I want to call your attention to the chat where you will see Anissa has put it in to sign up if you want to become part of the collaborative on immigration. There's a place for you to sign up. We also have posted the toolkit for how to become an immigrant welcoming congregation. That's in the chat as well. And I'm delighted to let you know that you may have seen it already, that we have people in the house from Illinois, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Nebraska, Wisconsin, California, and Oregon. Those are the ones I see there. If you're not from one of those states, type in, let us know where you're from, so we can see how large this is, that where we are and how we're moving along to be an immigrant welcoming denomination. So also to let you know that I'm just going to ask any of our panelists if you want to say a last word, because what we're going to be doing as closing, we're going to share a copy of a video. Oh yeah, we have somebody from Missouri. Welcome. And let's see some more. Yay, I'm loving this. Sun City, Arizona. Terrific. Thank you so much for typing in. We will be showing a very short video in our closing, and then Robert will close this out, but we will close with prayer at the appropriate time with our Reverend Randy Mayer, who's in the midst of it all right now. But again, if you have any questions, New Jersey, Massachusetts, this is great. Does anyone have a question? We have maybe time for one. Deb, go ahead.
I'd love to ask Sergio, what would you say to convince or encourage other faith communities to be involved, support new migrants?
Well, I will say that they are changing a life. They are integrate a person in a community that maybe doesn't have the opportunity to get enough information by themselves. So, and they are changing a life. And most of the time, it's not just one life. It's maybe a family, and it's create like the connection between the person and the community.
So true. I know Sergio now is actually working in the county and providing valuable services to other people in our community, and hoping to bring his family, be able to bring his family once he finishes his asylum case. So it is helping one life and the one whole extended family as well.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have another thought? Randy, do you have anything you'd like to say before we queue up the video?
Nope. I think This has been a great webinar, and it's great to hear people like Sergio tell their story, because I love to hear those stories of people that have moved into communities and have really begun to contribute and get their feet on the ground. That's what this is all about. And it's so great to see the effects that it has on local congregations.
Much. Robert, are we going to queue up the video before? But let me, if you would repost the UCC appeal really quickly for the letter to Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorga. If we would repost that in the chat for anybody who hasn't already signed on, go ahead and pick it up. It's in the UCC website. There it is. Thank you very much. Be sure to send your signature immediately, because the sign-on letter closes tomorrow at noon Eastern time. So that's where we did. Now, thank you all again for being with us. We're going to queue up the video, and then Robert's going to do some closing comments, followed by the last word from our pastor, Randy Mayer, who will close us in prayer.
Becoming an immigrant welcoming congregation for the Good Shepherd has meant that we've expanded our ministry and our vision of what ministry can be. We are standing here along the U.S.-Mexico border, and we know that looking at this border, it doesn't look very welcoming. But as a congregation that can work here along the border, we can welcome asylum seekers. We can welcome those migrants that are found in the desert and are needing humanitarian assistance.
Eso fue lo más mejor que me ha pasado, llegar a esta iglesia. Me ayudaron con mis papeles, con doctores, con casa, con todo, y me he sentido bien en todo.
As more and more people from across the whole country were seeking to have experiences of immersion here in the borderlands, it became clear to us that one of our ministries was to be educating others.
Bringing humanitarian care to people that are crossing the desert, being a place of refuge for asylum seekers and others that are needing care in our desert. So immigrant welcoming congregation has meant everything to the Good Shepherd United Church of Christ in Sahuarita, Arizona.
Thank you all again. Robert, do you want to close us in announcements, and then we'll close in prayer? Thank you again for being with us, friends. It's been great. And we also thank Sergio for joining us. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Robert.
And gracias a todos. It's an honor and pleasure to see all of you and hear your story. Sergio, gracias para tu historia. Thank you for your story and for sharing, giving us practical tools that we can do as congregations in the United Church of Christ. Someone from Nogales, my father was from Nogales, Sonora, seeing that barbed wire, it just continually breaks my heart, because I remember growing up, there was no barbed wire. It was just like a thick-foot gate that you could just run around, and you just showed your papers and it was cool. But to see that barbed wire breaks my heart, and the treatment of the folks, puts a question about what hospitality is in the United States. We're better than that. So thank you for bringing all of that energy for us to use as we continue with the struggle. So, and thank you, for attending, for watching our program. Know again that we are here Thursdays for the Soul, for the church, the wider church. So with that, Pastor Randy, pray us out.
Right. Let us be in prayer. Gracias a Dios. We give thanks to God, a God who crosses borders and is most present to those in need, the tired, the huddled masses yearning to be free. May God open our hearts, open our minds, help us to be people of compassion. Help us to open our hearts to the life-giving and life-changing experience of offering hospitality hospitality to asylum seekers, refugees, good and humble people knocking on our doors, simply asking, like Mary and Joseph, is there room at the end? May our response as God's people be filled with joy, be filled with compassion, filled with hospitality and faith and hope and all the possibilities. Gracias a Dios. And may the people say, Amen.
Amen.
Beloved in Christ, if this conversation has moved you, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed into the rest of your day and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.